The coronavirus pandemic has drastically altered presidential campaigning. Biden and President Trump have paused in-person campaign events, and states have pushed back primary elections until the summer months. Joining us now live to talk about how this can affect the presidential election is our expert pollster, John Couvillon. Thanks so much for joining us once again, John.
Good to be here today.
Well, let's start digging into this poll about this approval rating. Joe Biden in the lead?
Yes, and the interesting thing is, I guess kind of as a caveat, while it is true in the poll of polls that he has a lead, I'm of the opinion that it's a wider lead than I think will be the case by this fall because, number one, Joe Biden hasn't been tested yet, and number two, I'm of the opinion that equally applicable numbers here, in addition to the ballot test, are the Trump approval ratings and his approval or disapproval of how he's handled the coronavirus pandemic. Those numbers are better than the 42% you see for President Trump. So I think it's going to be a rapidly tightening race when we get to the summer.
And what about people who say these polls really don't say too much because back when President Trump was running against then candidate Hillary Clinton, all the polls showed Hillary Clinton in the lead and that she was going to win. So how much value can we really take in these polls?
The key word here is the plural word polls. In other words, I don't get excited at an individual poll. I'm more interested in a group of polling, which of course is what CNN has done. My attitude about the often repeated statement about quote unquote the polls missed it was that the polls at the end of the campaign showed Hillary Clinton with a 2 to 3 point lead, which in fact is what she did get from the national popular vote. Now, individual state polls, because the result was so close, the individual state polls being off, and it was in 5 states from what I counted, that's where the problem really lies. But it's not that all polls were bad. It's just that in a close race like this, even the tiniest error looks especially bad.
So at this point in time, does it look like it could be a close race?
I would say the answer is yes, for the reason being that President Trump had received 46% of the popular vote in the 2016 election. Every poll I have seen starting in 2017 and going forward, give or take a point, has been pretty close to that 46%. Incidentally, there's another number which I think needs to be considered here because it's going to dominate the election this fall. President Trump's handling of the coronavirus has actually a couple points higher than his job approval rating. I could see that as being something President Trump campaigns on, much in the same way that George W. Bush campaigned on 9/11 in the 2004 election.
So do you see there possibly being a poll just specifically based on this whole coronavirus epidemic? I mean, this is pretty influential on the polls, I would imagine.
What I see is that will be a question that most likely will be on almost every poll going forward, because given how pervasive the coronavirus has been, I do think that'll be front and center of the most important issue of this fall's election, where your perception of whether President Trump handled or mishandled the crisis is largely going to drive how you vote in November.
Will there be any influence from the fact that the president says, well, it's up to the governors, and so the coronavirus epidemic really is not completely on his shoulders?
See, what's interesting about that point is he technically has delegated it to the governors, but if, let's pretend after a couple months, if the unemployment rate gets unbearably high and the governors haven't responded and there is a perception that the coronavirus pandemic has passed, I think that could negatively rebound on President Trump if certain states, like the large ones, are not reopened. So even though he's technically delegated it to the governors for now, I don't think that in the mind of the average voter that Trump will get 0% of the blame or credit. I think it'll be a shared responsibility kind of thing.
Interesting. So, John, as we wrap up here, any final thoughts or any kind of nuggets that you think you're seeing or that we should know about?
The big nugget to me is not only looking at the horse race between him and Biden, which to me is very early because Joe Biden hasn't really been vetted. The bigger issue to me is following his President Trump's job approval rating and or his handling of the coronavirus crisis. If they stay in the upper 40s, President Trump does have a reasonable shot at being reelected. If they fall below 45%, that's where I think he'll be in greater trouble.